Podcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, hello everybody. This is Nick from Big Hairy Dog. We're going to go ahead and get started on our physical inventory QuickBooks Point of Sale webinar today. So I'm just going to kind of give you guys a rundown on how to prep for the inventory, how to actually go through the processes, and then how to finish it up. So the first thing we're going to do is just wait a couple more minutes to see if anybody else is going to join for us. And then also at the end of the broadcast, I will give you guys a link to our YouTube channel where you'll be able to find this video as well as some of our past broadcasts posted in case you want to refer back to it when you're doing the physical inventory or afterward. And I'll go ahead and unmute everybody right now if you have any questions before we get started. Is my volume okay for everybody? Is everybody able to hear me all right?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. And then, so what we'll be doing is we'll be going through the physical inventory. I'm going to put you guys on mute while we go through it. If you have any questions, try and hold them to the end. If it's something that pertains to what we're going over at that time, feel free and just shoot a question through the webinar or post something in chat, and I'll go ahead and try and stop what I'm doing and answer any questions. But yeah, feel free and ask whatever you want. It's going to be an open forum for the most part. It's better to ask and we'll answer it up. I'm sure you won't be the only one having the same question. So. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So first thing we're going to do is just kind of go over how to prep for the physical inventory. There's two ways to do a physical inventory for the most part. You can use zones, which kind of breaks the store up into different sections. So a lot of people do this with some sort of map of the store, and they'll break the store up into sections, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or jewelry case, wall rack, front rounder. However you find it best to section off the store to make it a little bit easier to A, count the store, and to B, reconcile the store once we're at the tail end of the physical inventory. So one of the things you'll find is when you're going through the reconciling part, you will find some discrepancies, of course, and the zones make it a lot easier to review those discrepancies and find them on the floor for the most part. But you certainly don't have to use zones, but it does make life a little bit easier from our experience. So most people will, draw out a map, section it off, and then assign certain zones to certain employees who are going to go count those sections. And then once they come back, they'll load them up, and then they'll mark them off and kind of sign off on the counts. And then once we get to the end, you can kind of look and see what items were in which zones, things like that. So to get started in QuickBooks Point of Sale, we're going to go ahead and go to our inventory, and we're going to start our physical inventory. Now, if you do have multi-store, you're going to want to do some store exchanges before you start. I won't in this case because this is just a single store application, but if you do have multi-stores, you're going to want to go through a couple of rounds of send and receives. Just as something to do ahead of time, just to make sure your counts are the same between both stores. Sometimes the counts can get a little bit off depending on if it's like halfway through the day or something like that. You just want to make sure you go through some send and receives to make sure that the inventory is matching up on both sides. Because if you're starting from different quantities on one side or the other, and then you're setting up the inventory counts at the end, you're going to get some discrepancies that we necessarily didn't want. So once we've started our physical inventory, you can see that we have our item list here. We're sorted by whatever field you'd like to sort by. So you can sort it here just for viewing, make it easier to view what you have. You have your expected. This is what QuickBooks Point of Sale is expecting you to start with currently. So this is what it thinks you have when you are beginning the physical inventory. Now this is what QuickBooks thinks you have, so it may not be what you physically have. So don't worry, this is going to obviously be a little bit different than what our counted column is. The counted column is what you actually have in your inventory. So there's a few ways to kind of go through this. You can either start in this list and go down and find the items that you have, and you can put a number into this counted column if you'd like. So let's say we're starting with this black and silver item here. We think we have 9. We actually go and count this product and we have 10. So now that we've counted one of our items, you can see that there is a difference on this item of +1, just showing you that QuickBooks thought you were starting with 9. You actually counted 10, so your difference is +1 there. So the same thing would kind of show up if we were counting less. So we have expected of 9, counted of 8, and then our difference of -1. So then that's showing us that, we're starting with 9, counting 8, and we have a -1 difference. And then down here in the bottom right-hand corner of the computer, this is a total net of positives and negatives. So at the end of the inventory, this will be a lot bigger than what we have in there now, of course, but it's basically showing you your overages, more than expected, your shortages, less than expected, and then your difference. So if you have, we'll just add another item here. So let's say we had 8 of this item as well. You can see that we had a more of 3, and then our price and cost, and then less of 1, and then our net of 2. So that is one way to enter in just items, off the cuff there. The best way you're going to be doing it for entering items in by hand is by going to I want to in the top left-hand corner, and then going to add counts by hand. So this brings up this box here, and you have a couple of different options that we want to look at here. Looks like we have a question here. All I'm showing is the QuickBooks Point of Sale physical inventory and no movement. Okay, hang on one second. Let me see what's going on with my screen here. Sorry about that. Okay, is that any better for everybody? Sorry about that. So let me go back a little bit then. If you were just seeing the QuickBooks Point of Sale screen, what I was referring to was this counted column, when we would enter in a positive quantity, more than expected, right? Expected is QuickBooks Point of Sales, what it thinks you're starting with. And then I was counting this one as, this one is actually less. So I was counting less on this one and then more on this one. And what you can see here is that our counted column and then our difference between the expected and counted, and then down here was the totals. So this was the more than expected of 3, less than expected of 1. You can see how those numbers are represented there, and then our total net difference there. So that's all I was showing there. I'm sorry about that. And then what I was going to is actually entering in the counts by hand. We're going to go to I want to, and then add counts by hand. You can do it from the counted, this screen here, but it's a lot easier to do it from here, especially if you're using like a hand scanner or something like that. When we first open up the add counts by hand box, you can see up here we have 2 options. We have the go to quantity fields and the add item. So what those mean, go to quantity field will, after you enter in an item's number, and you press enter, it takes you over to the quantity field here. That gives you the option to add in an actual quantity of the item, right? If you have 25 of them, you probably don't want to type in the number 25 times or scan the item 25 times. So you can enter in the item number 3389 and then enter in a quantity of 25 and press enter. And then it takes you back over to the enter items button here, or box here. So that way you can actually try and scan the items with the hand scanner, or you can enter in the next item that you're going to be counting. So let's say our next item is 10974. Then it brings us over to the quantity fields. We're going to type in 10 there. So you can enter in one quantity pretty easily if you're just typing in 10980 and then just enter again, and that'll add the one quantity. If you notice that you miscounted one of them, you can always go back to the counted column here, and you can type in the quantity of the item itself. So if you say, oh, instead of 15, I actually had 20, you can always go back and adjust the counted in here as long as you're still on the screen. And of course, once we bring it over to the counted column here, we can always go back and readjust it there as well. So the add item button here, and what all this is telling us is, are you sure you want to do this type of a thing? Add item, it means that you're only going to get one quantity. You're not going to get the option to actually change the quantity when you're adding in an item. So you can see that if I go back and I do 8044, 8046, 8137, it's only putting one quantity on here, and it's assuming that I'm only scanning one of each, right? So that's what add item does, is it doesn't give you the ability to change the quantity here. Now you can always go back and change it. So if we know we have 15 of this one, we know we have 7 of this one, and we know we have 9 of this one, you can always go back and change it. So this option is a little bit easier if you're using some sort of hand scanner and scanning them directly into here, or if you just want to go right down the list and type them in one at a time. And you can always type in the same item multiple times as well, and it will pick all those up and combine them as soon as we bring them back over to the screen. It looks like somebody had a question. Did you have a question?
No, I'm okay.
Okay.
Sorry.
No problem. All right. So that's basically all there is. But the difference between those two is go to quantity field, you type in the item, and then you change the quantity here, and then you add it to the screen. Add item is one item at a time, so you're adding in one quantity at a time, and you can always go back and change the counted, of course. So if you need to remove an item, obviously remove item down here. It's exactly what it does. Take those off of there for some reason. And then once you're done counting those items or putting in the quantities for them, you can go ahead and save it. And you can see that it brings over all the quantities that we have listed in that screen over here. And of course, we're seeing our totals down here in the bottom right-hand corner as well. So once you get it onto the screen, if you notice that something is wrong, you can obviously go back and adjust these. So if you want to go back and say, oh, we had 25 here, that looks wrong. Let's go back and recount. We actually only had 9. QuickBooks was correct when we had 9, or we had 12, or whatever we're adjusting it to. You can always go back and change it directly in the counted. And that way it makes it a little bit easy. You don't have to be on that screen that you were just on when you were manually entering them to change the quantities. So the next thing that we normally look at is our view of the actual items. So let's say we've gone through, we've counted all our products, we have everything set in there that we want, and we're looking at this giant list of inventory items, and we want to narrow it down to just see what we've counted. Well, instead of printing out a report to get something, you can look at it right on the screen. We have our view option up here in the top left-hand corner. This is kind of like filtering in inventory. So you can either create your own by doing create filter, and that brings up a box of all our different filter fields that you would have in inventory. So you can narrow down like one department or one vendor. I always like to give the example of like a Fabergé egg, right? If you have a department or a vendor that's really expensive, like a Fabergé egg, you may want to go and double and triple check those items just to make sure you have the correct quantities. So this filter view will let you drill down into the specific department that you're looking for, jewelry, let's say, and it'll bring up just the jewelry items that you have. And that way you can go back and check, double, triple check those, see what you have, and you can look at those and specifically. You can also look at just the counted. So if you have counted only, you're looking at the items that only have something in the counted column. So this is really beneficial when you're towards the end of the inventory and you just want to see kind of the list of the items that you have counted. Is also differences only. So this, in our scenario right now, is exactly the same as our counted. But if we went to all items and we put in some 3s, put in some numbers that were exactly the same as our expected, you can see that nothing shows up in the difference here. And if we go to our counted, these items show up, but if we go to our differences, they don't. So the differences is nice to see your discrepancies. That's essentially where we're going to get our discrepancy information from. But once we get towards the end, we'll go ahead and run a report as well to show the discrepancies. And that way we can get something printed out and have a hard copy so we can go look at the items out on the floor and see if we can figure out the discrepancies. So that's just something to note there. But once we've actually got in and counted most of our items, obviously we're going to be going to add counts by hand, and we're going to be going, doing this for the most part, where we're scanning our products. QuickBooks Point of Sale does have a physical inventory scanner. It's a Cipher Labs 8000. You can purchase one of those, or we do rent them as well. And those are a nice little tool, because what you do with those is you take them out and you scan a section of the inventory, or you scan most of the inventory, bring it back to the computer, and you can upload it directly into the computer. So if you were using a physical inventory scanner, you could go to I want to, and then you'd add the counts from the scanner, and it basically just dumps all the counts that are in the scanner itself into the physical inventory, so you don't have to count them by hand. So that does a couple of things, right? It helps you be a little bit more accurate, possibly. After a few hours of scanning merchandise or counting merchandise, the numbers can start to blur together a little bit. I know I've had that problem before. But using a scanner, obviously you're just hitting the barcode and you're directly getting the number off the barcode onto the scanner. And then once you bring the scanner over and you upload it into QuickBooks Point of Sale, it dumps the counts in right away. So the scanner is a nice little tool. I didn't necessarily want to show that today just because not many people have the scanner, or you guys may not have one or may not be using one. So I didn't want to go down that road and kind of alienate those people without one. So once we have a majority of our counts in, by entering them here, or adding them directly on this list here, we are ready to finalize the inventory. So the first thing we want to do is we want to save and continue down here. So, and this is another good point too, because you can always come out of this screen. So if you're open while you're doing the physical inventory, you can always save and continue and then close and go through and make your sale, or look up a customer's information, or do a voucher, or do a transfer slip, or whatever you need to do. While you're in the middle of the physical inventory, you can always come out and go back in. So once we've cut out of the physical inventory, we can always go back to inventory, start physical, and we're right back where we left off. So everything is saved. So the other buttons down here, the apply changes to inventory, this is the last and final step of the inventory. So we're going to come back to this, but I want to just draw notice to it because it's a very important button. If you click it before you're all done with your physical inventory, the changes will get written to the inventory and adjustment memos will get created. So just be really careful with this guy. So once we have all our counts in, we're ready to kind of go through the last few steps of the physical inventory. One thing we want to do before we're going to update the PI is we always want to take a backup of QuickBooks Point of Sale. And the reason we want to do that is in case the update doesn't go correctly, or if we want to look at what maybe we had counted ahead of time, we have this backup right before we started to update the PI. And we can always go back to that, restore it, and see what we have. So we're just going to go ahead and back up our data. Just going to back up to the default location is fine. I'm going to go ahead and back up. And this is really important because we've had people in the past run into issues when they're updating their physical inventory where they don't update all the items. They only update the counted items, and the rest of the items that we expect to go to zero because we didn't count them are still showing either positive or negative quantities. So it's always a good idea to have that backup from before you started the final parts of the physical inventory, so we can go back to it and just review what we had ahead of time. All right, so now that our backup's done, we're just going to go back into inventory, start physical inventory, and then we're going to go ahead and go through the final few steps of finishing out the PI. So the first thing we want to do is, now that we have all our counts in, we're going to go ahead and hit this little button down here, set all items not counted to zero. What this does, you can see when I check it, it turns all of our counted quantities that we didn't count manually and sets them to 0. This is a really important step because if we didn't count the product, we want the quantity to go to 0 because theoretically we don't have it, right? So this is a really big step just to make sure that when you count the inventory, you finished your counts, you check that box and make sure that all the counted quantities go to 0 for the items you didn't count, right? And you can see that they're a little bit gray compared to the bold number that we have here. And that's just telling you that that was the system making that change, right? You can see the difference between these ones here. Just the difference in the coloration between the counted and the 0 that the system put in. One other thing you want to do too is if it's already checked off, just make sure to uncheck it and then check it one more time, just to make sure that that is actually set. We've seen where this is set when we first come into inventory, and then we go through all our counts and then we update it, and this wasn't quite set correctly. So you always want to make sure to toggle it right before you're ready to finish. All right, so we go ahead and set our all items not counted to 0. And then we're going to go ahead and go to I want to, and we're going to run a couple reports. So we want to run some reports on the physical inventory itself, and then a differences report, which will give us the difference between the positive, the start and the counted. So we're going to run first our differences, and this is what people will commonly refer to as a discrepancy report. So it shows you all of your discrepancies. So here's our expected, what QuickBooks thought we were starting with. Here's your counted. And you can actually add some fields to this as well. If you come into, let me go a little bit slower there. If we go into modify and then add or remove columns. And the really important one here is difference cost. That's really the one you're going to want to look at. You can put on expected cost and counted cost, and you can add price if you'd like. But really what we're worried about is the cost, our cost of inventory items, right? So we're adding on difference cost, start or counted and expected cost. We're going to go ahead and rerun that. And the reason that I like to add these to the screen is because we can, sort it now by our difference quantity and our difference cost. And that will really allow us to find the items that we had the biggest discrepancy on. And the reason you want to add those and look at those guys, you may just have a bunch of discrepancies on there that are one quantity or small cost or something like that. Those are normal wear and tear of an inventory, right? Throughout the year, items get damaged, unfortunately theft happens, whatever it may be that causes the numbers to be different. You're gonna have those little one-offs or two quantity changes or whatever it is. You're not gonna be able to find every item that has a discrepancy on it. So really what you wanna focus on are the big ones, right? The big ticket items, like those Fabergé eggs I was talking about earlier, or the difference items, right? The ones that have a huge quantity difference, right? We started with 86 and we counted 0. Well, what happened there? Did we just miss the item? Did we scan a different item by accident? Or we were supposed to be scanning that item? Whatever it may be, we want to try and figure out why the number is so big, why the difference is so large, and then go and look at it and recount it. And that's why we always want to run the difference report before we update the PI, because we want to be able to go back and rectify those possible mistakes or whatever it is. Just go back and reaffirm our counts are proper. So once you're done, taking a look at this report, you can obviously print it, which is mostly what we want to, you want to print it out. You can kick it out to Excel and do some sorting in Excel if you'd like, or you can just print it and have your cashiers go find the items that you want to, highlight them, or sort this by specific departments or products. You can also filter this. So if you wanted the report to only show specific departments or vendors, you can go back into modify and excuse me. So we can go into I want to, and then you can change the report's appearance and things like that. But I apologize, there is no filter option on this report. So you'd actually have to go to the report center and run it from there to get the actual filter. But one thing you can do is you can kick it out into Excel and then, sort it by departments or vendors in there as well, and just make life a little bit easier. All right, so then once we're done looking at our discrepancy report, you've gone through, you've made your changes. Let's say we found some, right? So we know that this item, we counted 12, but we know we only have 9. So we go back in and we can change it right there. We go back into, this item here. QuickBooks thought we had 12. We counted 0 for what the system is showing. We actually have 11. So for some reason, we missed 11 of those guys. We went back in and changed those, changed these guys. And we go through and we're just, going off of that discrepancy report, that difference report, and we're trying to find the ones that jump off the page, right? The glaring issues. So once we've made all our changes, you can go back in and rerun the discrepancy report, the difference report. Or if you're happy with the numbers, you're happy with the counts, everything looks good, you're ready to actually do the update, you're going to want to run the PI detail report. So the PI detail report is every item, right? So not just the discrepancy items, the difference items, but it's every item that you've counted or haven't counted. Obviously, we have our zeros in there as well. And this just gives you a rundown of the entire inventory. So you can also see that you have a total at the bottom here. So get down to the bottom there. So here's our totals. So this is essentially what was expected. This is what was counted, and here's our differences. So that'll give you your totals for the inventory. So that'll show you, your shortage and overage and cost and price and quantity, of course. And we'll kind of just give you an idea of what the physical inventory is going to do to your cost of goods on hand and your inventory as a whole. So most people will print this out or save it to Excel and keep it for their future records. Save it onto a folder on your desktop at, PI February 2020, and then save the difference report as well. So once we have both of our reports all printed out and saved off somewhere, we're ready to update our inventory. So last thing we're going to do before we update is we're going to uncheck this and we're going to check it back off just to make sure that that setting is doing what it's supposed to be doing. And then we're going to save and continue. And then we're going to close and we're going to do one more backup, right? Always do one more backup right before you update the physical inventory. You can back up to the default location again. That's perfectly fine. As long as we have something right before we updated our PI, just in case we need to go back. It's a better safe than sorry scenario, right? We don't want to have gone through the entire physical inventory and then, wish we had a backup right before we had updated to go back to. So once we have our backup, we're going to go back into inventory, start physical, and then we're ready to go. So now we have all our counts in, we have our reports run, we're ready to update the physical inventory. So we're going to go ahead and apply changes to inventory. Basically what this message is saying is, are you sure you're ready to update, essentially? It's going to create adjustment memos for any changes in the quantities. We're going to go ahead and say yes. And it's going to go through and update the quantities from the physical inventory. And then the last thing it does after it updates the quantities is it's going to give us the opportunity to run those reports that we already ran. So it's going to give us the option to run the difference report or to run the detail report, or you can skip them. So we've already ran them. So once this is done, we're just going to go ahead and skip them. Okay, so it's telling us 7 quantity adjustment memos were generated. And so here's our options, right? Do we want to run our difference report? It shows items only differences. Or do you want to run the detail report, show all item counts? So we're just going to go ahead and skip this since we already ran them. Obviously, you can run them again if you'd like. But now that the physical inventory is completed, we're going to go and just check on a couple things here. We're going to go back into inventory and then quantity adjustment history. So you can see that we already have, here's are the adjustments that were generated from the physical inventory. Obviously, my adjustments are going to be much larger than yours since mine was just a test inventory and we didn't have too many counts in them. But this is kind of what they're going to look like, right? Once you complete the inventory, it's going to generate these physical inventory memos. And if you drill down into them, it'll show you what the difference quantity was and what the new quantity is. So let's see if we can add. We're going to put old quantity on there as well. So just so we can show you kind of like old, new, and then our difference. So here's the old quantity, here's the new quantity, and here's the difference. That's kind of what those adjustment memos will look like. Again, mine are a little bit more outrageous than they should be, but it's kind of what happens when you're doing a test here. And you can see down here in the bottom right, you'll see your difference cost and your difference quantity. So that'll tell you either positive or negative what happened on the adjustment. So then the last thing that I always like to do after physical inventory is run is I like to run an inventory valuation report. And the reason I like to do that is because that'll give us an accurate count of all of our numbers as of right now after the physical inventory is done. So a lot of people like to do this, run the inventory valuation and give an accurate count to their account. So this you can see here that we're looking at our total inventory extended cost of 1,921. Obviously, again, since I had very few counts in there, that's not going to be a great reflection on what your guys' inventory will look like. But that's kind of what I like to do after the physical inventory is run that report, save it off with the other physical inventory reports, and then if you need to send it to your accountant or whomever, that'll be the accurate count as of the physical inventory completion from that day that you do the PI. So then you can always go back and look in your inventory as well and take a look at some of your items on hand quantities. You can see that all the counts should be exactly the same as what you actually counted in the physical inventory itself. If for some reason there's an issue with the PI, you can always go back in to inventory, start physical inventory, and then you can go to I want to, show last physical, and you can look at the counts that were in the last PI. So even though we've completed it, here's the counts, right? Here's exactly what we counted on all these items. And here's kind of what happened to them. You can also reverse the previous PI. So you can reverse it and basically just like do exactly the opposite of what it did to the inventory. And that'll take away all the changes and you can start back from the beginning. Now just be careful with that. If you do reverse the previous PI, it does not put the counts in here. It completely wipes them out. So it reverses the PI, what the PI did to the inventory, and then it does not put back in the counted into the counted column. So this is one of the reasons why we took a backup right before we updated the PI. So in case we find something wrong with the PI, instead of reversing the last physical inventory, we're just restoring that backup and we're going back to right before we had updated it so we can see exactly what was about to happen when we do update the PI. Or go back and fix quantities or do whatever we need to do in the actual inventory. Now you can also run previous PI reports. So if you forget to run the detail report or the difference report, or if you just want to run them again, you can always come back in here and run these for the previous one. Now, if you've done multiple inventories, so if you do it for multiple stores, this only gives you the numbers for the last one that was completed. So if you've done one in January and then you do another one in August, let's say, for a cycle count or something, these reports for previous will only show you the last one that was completed. So it will only show you the one most recently done. But there always is that option to go back. So nothing is ever set in stone. But I really do like to stress backing up the data before you update the PI. That's always been a lifesaver for us in the past. And it's a good thing just to have in your back pocket in case something does go wrong. You can always restore from that. And we can always re-update the PI after restoring the backup. But it's always a good thing so we can see what was happening in the PI before it was updated in case there was an issue. Of course, we don't expect there to be any issues, but you never know. So it's always a best practice to have that backup and be ready to go. So then once you're finished with the PI and you go into the inventory start physical, you can see that we're back to square one essentially. So you can always come back in here and count other products if you'd like. Some people will use the physical inventory tool for cycle counting. So instead of just doing all your inventory all at once, you can create that filter and you can do that jewelry department like we were talking about a little bit ago. And you can update only these items, right? Now, if you are doing some sort of cycle count, you want to be really careful that when you're doing the cycle count, you're not setting this all items not counted to 0. And the reason you don't want to do that is because when you do this, even though we're filtered for just the jewelry inventory, you can see that if I check that off and then we go back to our differences, we have non-jewelry items in here in this list. So this does the entire inventory, but if you're counting just a subsection of it, you want to just make sure that you're updating just these items, right? So you would just save and continue, apply changes, and then it will update just those jewelry items. So change those guys. So that's for cycle counting. So cycle counts is, something people use every now and then, not very often. Most people just do one full PI every year, but cycle counts are nice if you want to, just see how one department's doing, just making sure that the inventory is correct in that department every couple months, or to see how one vendor's doing throughout the year, something like that. So. All right, but that is basically it. That was a rundown of physical inventory in QuickBooks Point of Sale. Does anybody have any questions or anything they'd like me to go back over? I'll kind of open up the mics if you guys want to chat.
One question.
Sorry, what was that? Did somebody have a question?
I do.
Sure.
I am just wondering, my physical inventory is done. I did it at the beginning of January, and I didn't run an inventory valuation. So can I go back in and do that?
Certainly, yeah. The inventory valuation report can be run for previous days. So if you're running the inventory valuation, you can actually change the date here back to December 31st or whenever you updated the physical inventory. It will, and then it'll give you the numbers for that day.
Okay. So I get into there by going from inventory reports. Okay.
Yeah, reports and then items, and then inventory valuation. And then there'll be the date range at the top where you can change the date range back to the date of the physical inventory completion, and that'll show you the numbers. Okay.
And if I found some mistakes after it was all done, found some items that we didn't count, does it pay for me to try to go in and fix that, or?
Yeah, certainly. If you found an item that wasn't counted or was counted incorrectly or whatever it may be, you don't want to go back in and start a whole new physical inventory to do that. What I would suggest doing is just doing a new quantity adjustment.
Okay.
If you do new quantity adjustment, you just enter in your item, whatever it may be, and then change your new quantity to the quantity that it should be. And you can do this. You can add multiple items here. You can add all your items that you found that may be incorrect or whatever it may be, just down this list and change the quantity. But yeah, if it's just a handful of items, it's worth it just to do a quantity adjustment. If you found that a good 75% of the inventory seems to be a little bit off, then maybe redoing the physical inventory is the best option. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. All right. Any other questions? The mics are open, guys, if you want to just jump in and chat.
Well, I just have one question.
Sure.
Because I do basically the inventory by myself, and I've got a big store. In the scanner you were talking about, it would be so worth me getting, because it's like I was looking at the Big Hairy Dog website, and how well do they stay updated? I mean, is it something that you can use for multiple years, or?
Yeah, certainly. we've been using the Cypher Lab for about a year now, and the only reason we went to the Cypher Lab is because the Metro Logic that came before it. Um,
Uh-huh.
we had used the Metro Logic for about maybe like 7 or 8 years. It just stopped being manufactured by the manufacturer, unfortunately. So it was still being supported by QuickBooks Point of Sale and Intuit, but the manufacturer either went out of business or whatever the case was. But this Cypher Lab, we expect it to be around for quite a long time.
Uh-huh.
We don't update the products very often, and we certainly won't stop supporting it, even if that is the case. We still support the MetroLogic scanners, even though they've been discontinued by the manufacturer. So
Because I think it would be most beneficial to have for me, because this is taking me forever to do by myself.
they're certainly a boon to the physical inventory. They're really great products. They're super easy to use and super simple to get connected and working. So I can have somebody reach out to you if you want to chat about that, and then we can set up a training appointment to get it installed for you.
Yeah, I think that might be a huge thing. So that would be perfect.
All right, sounds good. If you want to stay on the line after the webinar, Lori, then I'll go ahead and just get a little bit of information from you, and then we'll shoot you over some info.
Okay.
Mhm.
So I think for the most part, I was already into this and doing it and seeing things as far as inventory adjustments and stuff. So I understood all that. It's taking me way longer than I want.
Yeah, it can take quite a while. What a lot of people will do is they'll print out a portion of the inventory and like on or in an Excel sheet or something like that, and just go and write down the numbers and then bring it back and enter them one by one. But the scanner is probably the best bet. If it's taking you quite a while, and especially if it's just you doing it, that can definitely take a long time.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
I had a banker tell me I had too many SKUs, and I said, "Have you ever been in a store?"
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Any other questions out there? All right, then I'm going to go ahead and just paste something in our chat here. So this is a link to our YouTube channel. This is where this webinar will be posted, as well as previous ones. So it's a nice little thing to have in case you want to go back and review this or previous webinars. And then also one last thing I like to mention too, because this has helped me out enormously in the past, is if you're running into issues with doing the physical inventory and the videos aren't helping or whatever it may be, the help contents in QuickBooks Point of Sale are really great. They have a lot of information on doing the physical inventories. So it kind of just outlines basic steps, editing counts, entering counts, like just kind of the overview of the entire inventory. And it walks you through step by step how to do everything, which is really great. So if you guys do run into issues, you can always go into help and then help contents, and you can search for whatever topic. It's not even just physical inventory. It could be anything, receiving a voucher, doing a purchase order, whatever it may be. You can search for it in here. And then it also gives you a rundown on the physical inventory scanners, how to install them, how to use them, things like that. Obviously, we're always here to help. But if you're running into a pinch, or if you just want to review some of the help topics in QuickBooks, they have a really great list of them here. So. All right, so if that's all the questions, if nobody else has anything for me, I'm going to go ahead and stop recording. And then I'll stay on if anybody has anything else that they want to chat about that has to do with physical inventory. And I'll talk to you as well, Lori, about getting some information
Okay.
on that scanner.
Perfect.
All right, guys. Well, enjoy the rest of your day, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.